Welcome to Defense Diaries. I am your host, Bob Mata, and I am joined by my beautiful and brilliant co-host, Allie. What is up, girl?
Hey, babe. Hey, all.
So we are really excited about what we've got going on tonight. And hold on, I got to shut this down. Of course. Okay, so we have been waiting patiently for these interviews as we are continuing our coverage of the Richard Allen case. As you know, we have been covering this case for a couple of years since the date of arrest of Richard Allen. We have covered it pretty thoroughly in terms of the legal process all the way up and through trial. And it is one of those cases that has been very polarizing out in kind of the true crime world, out in the trial observers world. It's been controversial in a lot of different ways. So we are very, very excited for the next 3 nights where we are going to be having brethren of ours, fellow defense attorneys, the ones who tried this case back in October and November of this year. And we're going to get into as much as we can and as much time as Jennifer is willing to give to us, which we'll find out, I guess, tonight. But let me bring her on.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, babe. Jennifer Auger, what's up, girl? How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? It's good to see you again.
I'm excellent. I'm sorry, Allie. I cut you off.
It's all right. We're podcasting, so let's just let those things slide. Hi, Jennifer. Nice to officially meet you. I know we briefly met just a second ago.
Yeah. Nice to meet you too, Allie.
I had told Allie I couldn't wait to get you two together. Sadly, it's virtually. I have a feeling that you guys are going to like each other a lot. You guys have a very similar style inside the courtroom. You're both pit bulls, and I think that you guys would enjoy each other's company. You guys could tell war stories all night, I'm sure. So, Jennifer, I've got we're going to kind of. I tried to always make my lives more conversational. I'm gonna break that rule of myself a little bit because I do want you to do a bulk of the talking tonight. So I'm going to try to just ask you a question and give you a wide berth to answer it.
And we expect it'll turn conversational as well. So
for sure. And Allie's got questions as well. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, about your professional background, in case there's some kids.
So I kind of grew up in a law office, like you. My dad was a lawyer. My parents got divorced when I was pretty young, and so I would ride the bus to my dad's office after school every day, and they would put me to work. So grew up in that environment. I remember when he had trials, I would go over to the courthouse after school and walk in the courtroom and watch him. My mom got really upset when I went and watched a rape trial when I was in 4th grade. She didn't like that very much.
Understandable.
Yeah. And so I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. I was
And always knew to protect yourself.
Yeah, right. So, I was really blessed. I was able to go to Emory Law School. They have a really fantastic trial techniques program there. Started out at the public defender's office in DeKalb County. And then ultimately we made our way back to Franklin. We started having kids and needed help. That was trying murder trials was way easier than raising kids, right?
There you go.
So you're licensed in Georgia as well as Indiana?
Not anymore.
Inactive.
Yeah, I've worked in Georgia, Virginia, and Indiana.
Yeah, Allie's licensed in PA and New Jersey as well as Illinois, and I'm licensed in Pennsylvania as well because we had actually hung our first shingle out there. But we let those go as well because I didn't want to do the CLEs out there.
Do you typically practice out in the Carroll County and/or Allen County?
No, I'm down in Franklin, which is like about a half hour south of Indianapolis. So Brad Rozzi initially got the call for the case. He's in Logansport, which is just one county over from Carroll County. And then he made some calls and hooked up with Andy Baldwin. And Andy started off working for my dad. I've known Andy forever.
Wow.
He's in fact, he's in my dad's office. So when things kind of were getting really chaotic for Brad and Andy, I reached out to Andy and sent a text, hey, I'm sorry this is going on. I hate that you're going through this. You know that we all support you. You're a great guy. Let me know if you need any help. Like a supportive phone call.
Right. A mind to bounce things off.
Yeah. You need some research help. I can do that.
Yeah. That took a turn, quite a bit of a turn there. So
watch what you ask for.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't even know that she asked. She was just offering to, lend a supportive hand. So like when you get that call, who calls you? Brad or Andy?
Well, I'd never met or talked to Brad. So end of February, maybe February 17th, I think, I was on my way to Wisconsin. Andy called, said, hey, we really need some help. It started off with a TUI request. So if you want to, you guys know, but depose someone from the federal government or call them as a witness, there's a whole process that you have to go through. And they were just beat down with 26 gigabytes or whatever of evidence. And so would I help out with the forensic pathology stuff? And I immediately said yes.
Yeah.
And then that morphed what they wanted me to do, how I could be helpful. That kind of morphed along the way.
Yeah. And as far as kind of your background in terms of trying homicide cases, I mean, had you been doing it for a while? I mean, did you feel comfortable in the courtroom in terms of this is a very high profile case, and coming into it's like a different experience, right?
Well, I've had high profile murder cases in the past. And I kind of stepped back for a while from doing those. I had 2 murder trials and a B felony resulting in death of a child while I was pregnant with one of my children. In total, there were 7 dead children.
Wow.
And that was a lot.
Yeah.
In hindsight, maybe a little too much. So I kind of stepped back from it. And then my kids grew up and they were out of the house and I had a lot of time in my hands. And I started doing more criminal work. So a high profile case wasn't new to me. What was new to me was the social media, the people with the cell phones. That was a lot. And somehow, even though I live in 2024, now 2025, I didn't appreciate how much that would kind of affect what we did. I don't know that it affected what we did.
But added pressure to the whole process, I'm assuming.
Exactly. A ton of pressure. Not only just people are always there, people are saying things, a lot of things that are true, a lot of things that aren't true, but just the magnitude of information. It's not just what you get in discovery, because some of this stuff, it turns out, that was on social media was, we could tie to things at the trial.
Right.
And we should have done, in hindsight, we would have had many more people working with us who could, monitor all of this. Because there are things out there that I think were really relevant that we weren't aware of at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm assuming one of those was the surprise of the way that they used that white van by, I'm assuming, arguing that that was something only the killer could have known. But those of us that were familiar with the case, and those who even are way more, active on Reddit, I mean, from beginning till end, had been talking about a white van being in and around that area for some time. But I got the impression that either the significance of how they were going to use the white van changed at the time of trial, or I don't know. Why don't you tell us how was that an example of what you're speaking about?
That is a big example of what I'm speaking about. I didn't pay it. I made a concerted effort when I got involved to stay away from the social media because I thought it was going to be distracting. And I had, I've got my own practice, and now we just picked up this, and I've got mountains and mountains of work to do. So thought I would keep my head down, do my work. That was just going to be kind of distracting. I don't know what just happened there. But in hindsight, I wish we would have paid better attention. I don't know how, that we could have, because of the volume of information. There's so much out there, but yeah,
they almost need like a new role in the legal industry for either an expert or a third party, because I know I was behind the scenes talking to Bob saying, what they need is someone like what we use for a change of venue. When you have someone go out and create those jurors questionnaires and they monitor all the media and the social media posts, someone like that, because I'm assuming that they've got something that, I don't know if fishes is the right word, but searches the internet more effectively than we could, but then can also say and testify with some authority that this was what appeared on the site at this time, and someone to sort of present it all.
Absolutely. I think that if, my advice to anyone going forward in any type of case like this with this kind of publicity is have someone, it could have been a full-time job.
Oh yeah.
To monitor the social media.
Oh, no question about it. I think with technology the way it is, I think that AI, whether, and I have a very specific opinion about AI. I'm terrified of it. I'm terrified of it in our profession. But that would be a very useful tool. I think that you could probably have AI kind of monitor all of the social media websites, put in keywords and, anything related to a case, and it's going to be able to do it in a way that is eminently faster than any human being could do it. And I know some human beings that have, really followed the case pretty heavily, that have been instrumental in helping Allison and I get information, namely Sleuthy Goosey is her screen name. She's amazing. Like she she can cull information but like AI is going to be able to do it instantaneously. And, even from my perspective, kind of sitting back, and I was really just covering the pleadings, right? I wasn't like involved, obviously, with the defense in terms of knowing what the evidence was, but the amount of people that I had in my DMs because of my coverage alone, providing me information that seemed like it had legs from my end of it, not knowing anything that was in the discovery, but kind of like me vetting what this guy was telling me in particular, and being like, wow, like everything this dude is saying is checking out. But it was a much grander story, you know what I mean? But the point's well taken. There was just so much out there, which before we jump into it, I mean, was there a concept with the team? And if you can't answer it, don't, like, I mean, was there a thought of like asking for a continuance before trial, or were you guys worried about Rick making it to trial? You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, it seems like there's never enough hours in the day to prepare for a trial like this. And when you have just the magnitude of stuff that was out there in terms of discovery, and 15 gigs or terabytes of what you guys had, which is such a tough decision for defense attorneys to kind of come to that conclusion, on whether or not to go or not go.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I've ever gone into a trial and thought there is not a single other thing I can do. Right.
Yeah.
Work expands to fill the time within which you have to do it.
Yep.
I don't want to talk about, I don't think it would be appropriate to talk about trial decisions and strategy.
Yeah.
But looking back, more stuff would have just popped up. So,
Yeah.
you're back ending all this stuff on social media but even at the time, I don't think any of us appreciated that any of that would affect an evidentiary presentation, right? That's
Right.
legal language, but none of us thought that what was out on social media was going to affect anything we were going to do in trial.
Or
Right.
would be extremely relevant to the evidence.
Or would we be able to get it into evidence? How can we authenticate some of these things? Right. So,
the main one to me that seemed, not knowing everything that you guys know that might exist on social media, was just that whole thing with the white van, that information had been out there. They had been discussing it specifically in relation to Brad Weber's house and where the van went, and that people had seen it. There were some other stories about white vans in the area as well, but for whatever reason, people knew very early on, what about that white van? And it only was important when the state tried to argue that only the killer would have been able to say anything about a white van. And what we don't know, and maybe you do, it was whether he's being asked, questions about the white van. We know you had a white van. We know you were with the guy with the white van, making it seem like he just sort of volunteered that on his own is not something but I'm obviously a skeptic, especially based on the facts of this case and just being a defense attorney. It just seemed so disingenuous. And I don't know if some of that came as a surprise that they were going to use that white van in that way.
Well, to speak, I don't want to talk about trial strategy there,
Understood.
God willing, we'll have another trial.
Keep it in your back pocket.
Yeah, exactly. But, to your point, you said we don't know if he was asked about a white van. Part of the, structural issues with this case all comes out of the Indiana Department of Corrections. We will never know what Monica Walla said to Rick Allen or asked Rick Allen, because that was the apparently only time that Rick Allen wasn't recorded while he was at Westville. Her notes have been shredded. In I don't know.
Yeah, I want you to say that again, because Rick Allen, you know, if you were at the trial and you're aware, they had him recorded 24/7. There was an in-cell camera. And when he was transported, that's when the controversial camcorder, which, by the way, the warden had originally said did not have sound.
Did you guys ever get it with sound?
Yeah, they did.
No,
did
the defense, were you ever produced it with sound?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, the reason I know that is because Brad was going to play the videos from the camcorder.
No, I thought that was the state.
Brad was going to play the videos from the camcorder, like, of them transporting Rick. And then he mentioned the fact when he was getting ready to cue it up, he mentioned it in front of Judge Gull that it had sound. And Gull was like, what? It's like, sound. So they had to, like, they had to go and they had to re-pull all the videos, and Max had to take all the sound out of it so they could show them. So, but that was shocking because the testimony initially at the first safekeeping hearing with the warden on the stand had said that camcorder did not have sound. And that was when Brad was trying to make a point of, we are there on an attorney-client visit, and they're turning our client's chair to face a window, and you're recording him. And we don't know, you know, so I was like, because as an attorney, I was like, oh my God, like, are you serious? And they, I mean, if you go back and look at his testimony, it's in stone. I mean, the man testified that camcorder had no sound. And I went back, like, after that hearing, I came home and I told Alice, I'm like, did those old camcorders, like those handhelds, was there a way to turn off the microphone? And like, I didn't know the answer to it. So yeah, like the Monica Wallet thing is really hard to wrap your mind around in terms of what she may or may not have done. But to have her in a position to where we have no idea, like you said, what she said or what she didn't say, and no way to prove it. And it turns out, which I did not know, and that was one of my questions, you beat me to the punch, was that the only time in all the time that Rick was at Westville that he was not, that was not taped? And with that day that he made that wordy confession, the confession that she claims that he made.
Well, none of his, Brad is the best person to ask about this, but none of those, you know, when they let him out of his cell on a leash, sometimes hooded in shackles, to the cage where he got his mental health treatment, the cage mental health sessions were not recorded. And that's it. That is, to my knowledge, the only time at Westville he was not recorded. And this, remember, I mean, you guys know this, but at that point in time, according to our Constitution, according to the federal Constitution, according to the state Constitution, he is innocent. He is innocent, and we are treating innocent people this way.
It's outrageous.
It's beyond anything. I'm so disappointed in our society. This should never happen in a civil society, what they did to Rick Allen.
And I, you know, was kind of shocked that she was calling the audio from those cameras hearsay when they're not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. And it's to present the conditions and his demeanor. And like, I'm assuming that is one of the stronger issues. Is that one of the stronger issues you see for appeal?
Well, I'll leave that to the appellate lawyers. I think we have a lot of really strong issues. And that would probably be one of those second or third tier ones.
Right.
Maybe.
I shouldn't have called it one of the stronger. just an
No, I
issue
mean,
like
there are
that.
just a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues.
There are, and kind of like we had chatted about like what we kind of wanted to get into, and like I really wanted to start from, and Allie thought we had a disagreement on the weight of this particular issue, which it goes directly to due process, and it deals directly with, October 26th, when Rick is taken into custody after the Holman interview. And, at that point, he never sees the light of day again. That was the last time he, ever stepped foot as a free man anywhere in the state of Indiana. And, I had developed a relationship with Kathy in terms of trying to support her through this entire thing. And she's, telling me during, like, in between trial days, she tells me that she had hired a lawyer for Rick that day, that she had gone home, she had found a guy, paid a retainer, and that, she had a guy that was out there making calls, trying to find out what was going on with her husband. Right. And, you come to, and at that point, we're like in the middle of trial, and I'm like, my mind is kind of blown, because I understood what happened with the safekeeping process in terms of how that went down. I mean, there's still a lot of kind of very muddy, murky parts of that in terms of procedurally how that actually happened. But, they end up formally charging him on the 28th. Right. And she's got a lawyer that she had retained, she being Kathy Allen, for her husband, who had made the calls, presumably to Carroll County. So they were on notice that they had a guy that was working for them. And, the way that the story was told to me is that when they formally charged him, Kathy called and said, "What are we going to do now?" And this dude's like, "Well, I need a huge sum of money to try this case," which Kathy's like, "Well, I don't have it," so, but at that point, you've got this situation where they end up having this safekeeping hearing at some point between the 28th and November 3rd or 2nd, whenever he ends up getting moved. And Rick's not there. A lawyer for Rick's not there. And that begins this process of moving a pretrial detainee into the most secure cell and the most secure prison in the state of Indiana on a safekeeping order that puts him in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. And like, that's where that journey began. And you can't look at that journey without understanding how it affected this case overall, because it's in those 3 months when he makes all these statements, which, if we're ever lucky enough to hear from the jurors, which, by the way, have you heard from any of the jurors? Have you guys had the ability to be able to talk to any of them?
We have not. We would love to.
Man.
Really, really love to. I mean, I'm disappointed in the verdict, but I would love to have a respectful conversation with anyone who wanted to. I'm kind of surprised we didn't hear from one or more of the alternates.
Yeah.
But hopefully we can do that. I would love to know what they hung their hat on.
100%.
And everybody wants to look. You've got 2 children who were horribly, horribly murdered. Everybody wants to find the person who did it. Everybody wants to make sure that person receives justice. We do too, right? But the only people that jury could point the finger at, the only person that jury could point the finger at, was Rick Allen. We weren't able to present all of our evidence.
Right.
So I think that might have been impactful. I don't know.
Let me ask you first, if there are any jurors who listen to this, or someone who knows a juror who listens to this, is it fair to say that you or any of the defense attorneys would be open to a confidential conversation where it's not, you're not going to share what they say and you just want to get some feedback? Is that Is that a possibility?
100%. If I could, I would drive to where they are the moment I got the call.
Because I just want jurors to know a lot of times it's just for the lawyers to get an idea what was your decision making, what would have made a difference, what was important to you. And the lawyers, we don't give the jurors a hard time when we ask them those questions. I'm always respectful of the verdict and just gracious and thankful that they're willing to speak to me, because it helps not only with that, should there be a new trial here, but in other trials moving forward. Sometimes I want to say, was I annoying as shit? Like, did you find something that I did? What is there something that I did that annoyed you or that you didn't like, something like that. So if there are any jurors out there listening, you're not going to get the third degree if you're willing to call the lawyers. They don't have to tell anybody what you've said, or just give a call and say, if in fact you want to speak confidentially, that's what you want to do. And, Jennifer is saying she'll be gracious, thankful, and ready to come wherever you are.
All ears.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people gave up a month of their lives. That's hard. In a lot of respects, their lives were probably harder than mine. I could pick up the phone and call my kids.
Right.
I could do all those things. And we're appreciative of that. And like you said, even if they don't want to talk about the reasons they came to their verdict, for me, having the opportunity to talk to jurors, I'm always cognizant when I'm in the courtroom, what am I doing? What's going on? And so to the extent, like you said, am I being annoying? I mean, this is, heavy stuff, like the heaviest of stuff. And, I have gallows humor, and, that's kind of an escapism for me. And sometimes I know I probably, would joke with one of my co-counsel, and did the jury see that? Did they think that we were not being serious? Things like that,
Yeah.
When I looked at you, were you offended by that? When I faced you, when I was cross-examining this person, was that offensive to you? All those things that you want to use, because, as a lawyer, you don't just prepare for your questions, and you don't just learn the background. You think about where you're going to stand. You think about the order of your questions. You think about, am I going to point here? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? It's a production. A trial is a production. When we had our trial techniques class at Emory, they flew in actors from all over the country. We had VHS tapes, and I'm that old. And they had a mock courtroom. Yeah, we had a mock courtroom. We took our VHS tape. We did our, our cross or our direct or whatever, and then they would eject it, and we'd take it down the hall and watch it with a bunch of actors and actresses, and they would critique us. And that was just fantastic experience.
That sounds like a great experience. Now, Bob, I know you probably have a direction you want to go, but Jennifer had brought up the evidence that the jurors didn't get to hear. Can I ask her about that yet, or you want to?
I would love to hear that. I would love to hear that.
From your perspective, what do you think some of the most significant that you can tell us about, or are able or willing, evidence that the jurors didn't get to hear?
Well, I reviewed Rule 3.6 on trial publicity. And so I can talk about anything that's part of the public record in those July hearings, and everything that was admitted in July. That's all part of the public record. To me, that's kind of a tiered approach. To me, I will never understand, at that July hearing, Dawn Perlmutter came and testified.
And remind people who don't know what the hearing you're talking about was about.
Sure. Okay. So that was the hearing. We got an email on a Sunday before the May trial date from the judge saying, hey, just a reminder, this is set for how many days, no more, no less. I'm well versed on third party culpability. We can get this done. And then later that Sunday, Nick Mcleland filed his motion in limine to keep out. And a motion in limine is a motion saying, hey, judge, for these reasons, we don't think this evidence should be heard by the jury. And so the judge appropriately set that for a hearing. And we showed up for the hearing. It didn't happen in May because we didn't have enough time. I think everybody realized we didn't have enough time even for the trial. And so the motion in limine hearing on what evidence we could present was continued and the trial was continued. So we come back in July for 3 days. And in one of the motions that we argued were those motions in limine. Can we present our third party evidence? Can we talk about the crime scene? Can we talk about, which is it crazy that we have to ask about for permission to describe, to give our version of what the crime scene meant, the things at the crime scene. Can we talk about the Odinist angle? Can we talk about cults involvement? Can we talk about ritualistic killings? Can we talk about all of these other suspects that the state investigated? These weren't people we came up with. Odinism isn't something that Brad and Andy came up with. I can assure you that. These were all things that the state investigated. And ultimately Brad and Andy were able to find out that they had investigated it. Thank goodness for Todd Click in his foresight to mail that letter to the Carroll County prosecutor. But so that hearing was, in July, was to determine, is the judge going to let us present this evidence of our third party suspects? That was a long answer. Sorry.
No, that was precisely, one of the answers. And before I circle back to that, geofencing, that was something that you were actively involved in, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I know there was a pre-trial motion on that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think what the evidence was you were trying to get it in? What do you think it could have shown? As much as you can tell us about that.
Sure. So the geofencing is, if you have an Android or if you have an iPhone and you have Google open, anytime you pass a wireless access point, it pulls your location. So, if I go to the mall and for some reason, anytime I'm near a mall that has a Williams-Sonoma, I get an ad, right? That's Google collecting all your data. And so they're pulling back on it now, but at that point they weren't. And so they can send out warrants to Google and say, hey, in this area during this time frame, we want all of the cell phones in that area. And so the first step, Google sends back device IDs that you can't associate with any individual. And they'll say, okay, these are all the devices we picked up. And then you can start to narrow those down. And so the significance, and remember, this was all on the state's witness and exhibit list.
Right.
These were people on their witness list that they then filed a motion in limine for.
To exclude. Right.
Yeah. No, we shouldn't have this evidence. Okay. And so just the sheer number of people, right? And the course of the investigation, the people that they could identify who were near the scene. And when you get these Google warrants back, it doesn't say they were precisely at this point. They've got a zone. They're within so many meters. And sometimes it's 2,500 meters. But it's in that zone. And so, it was relevant for a couple of reasons in that, number one, the sheer number of people who were there who not only could have been a suspect, could have been involved or seen something, and how they followed up with these people. There were over 14,000 leads called in. Coincidentally, only one was for Rick Allen, and he called it in himself to let them know he was there.
And the IMEI, that was something that we heard during the trial and beforehand was the first thing that officers asked of Richard Allen when they talked to him way back then, and explained to people why that question was important as it relates to geofencing and what was not there.
Sure. So, they have his IMEI. I always get those in my head. I always get the alphabet mixed up. But that identifies his phone, right? And so that could have shown up if he's connected, right? If he passed the wireless access point and he had that connectivity, then that could have shown up on one of their warrants that they could have gotten that information for.
And as far as like those WAPs, those wireless access points, is that limited to towers?
No.
So explain that a little bit more. I was going to get into some of the Stacey Eldridge stuff, and you guys had retained her, and I thought that she was an excellent witness. I thought she was
Jennifer
very
remind us what was her last name?
Eldridge.
Eldridge testified to, and
so she was our cell phone expert. She's phenomenal. She was an analyst for the FBI. Now she teaches and does private forensic work. And so, your cell phone, and you guys know this, but not everyone does. I really didn't know nearly as much as I should have known before I got involved in this. There's a bunch of information you can see if you dig down really deep, but there is a ton of information that you can't see. And sometimes you know what it is and sometimes you don't. So like I have an iPhone and Apple designs it and they keep those things very secret, what all this means. And so software companies come in and they can extract the data off the phone, all the data you can't see. Stacey had a great analogy. It's kind of the under the hood stuff, because I know nothing about what's under the hood of my car. I can check my oil level. That's about it. And so there's software that pulls all of that information off. And then there's additional software that parcels it out into information that is readable if you know what you're doing. And so I don't have the software to extract it. We did get the extraction from the state. But I don't know enough to look at it, and really no attorney does. You have to have an expert in these things. So we hired Stacey Eldridge, and she jumped on and was just fantastic. And then I don't know if you want to talk about her findings, but
I want to talk about all of it. I want to talk about all of it. So, but in terms of just kind of explain, and we talk about it a lot on our channel, that there is that aspect of hiring experts because they teach us things. We are lawyers. We're trained in a very specific way to do very specific things. And when we are one of the few that ends up going to trial, there aren't that many trial lawyers. It's a very small percentage. There's this misconception that all lawyers are trial lawyers, and nothing could be further from the truth. We're a rare breed, actually. So when we hire these experts, we use them to teach us about the technology that we don't know about and don't understand. We use them to help us craft questions to ask their experts, the state's experts, all those things that we need from those experts, and they're critical. So like I learned so many things that I didn't know sitting through the trial when Stacey was up there. Like I don't know anything about the under the hood stuff in iPhone. And it's fascinating to me because companies actually exist on this planet in order to try to figure out Apple's secret sauce. Like their entire function is to try to figure out how to crack Apple's code so that we can figure out all of the data that they're mining from all of us. And that was a fascinating aspect of her testimony that I really had no idea, because Allie and I had dealt with Cellubrite before, and many times, and that's always progressing in terms of what they're able to figure out. And so talk about the aspect of the concept of these texts that flooded in at 4:33 in the morning, where all of a sudden there's no activity on the phone, and then there is. What did you guys take from that when she made you aware of that?
Well, we knew that even before. Yeah, we knew that before we hired Stacy. And that obviously was a big deal, that the cell phone wasn't connected to a tower, for hours prior to 4:33 a.m. And then at 4:33 a.m., I think 15 texts, SMS messages came through. And so we were aware of that. And there were, different theories floating around about why that was. And Chris Cecil, who was the state's expert from the Indiana State Police, who worked really hard until his last testimony. He was, fantastic, and he worked really hard. And one of the things you brought up was, there are companies that chase Apple for all of their, what does this mean? And in one of Chris Cecil's first reports, in his second report, he included scientific articles. There are people, I think there's a big group in Netherlands, I think. And one of the things that came up was the Apple Health data and flights climbed. And so they did all these studies. What does that mean? How many feet is a flight? Well, it's 10 feet. And, because that's not general knowledge, and they have to go out and do all of these studies. But so from the beginning, we weren't sure. So in Chris Cecil's first report, he said that the battery to the iPhone likely died sometime around 10 that evening on the 13th. And so that was our premise. The phone.
Was that consistent with something on the Celebrate report, or was that only in his written report? Do you know?
Yeah, no, it's consistent with the data on the Celebrate report too, because so your phone, if you have an iPhone, right, you can get iMessages. I can't remember. One's in blue and one's in green.
Right.
You think I would know that, but I don't.
iMessages are blue.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, you've got iMessages and then that are blue, and then you have SMS messages that are green. And the way those get from one phone to another is different. So the blue iMessages go through an encrypted Apple server to get to your phone. SMS messages travel through the tower. So if you don't, in the iMessages, the blue iMessages, those are timestamped as of the time they're sent. SMS messages are timestamped as of the time they're received. And social media, those Snapchats, that kind of thing, those are all timestamped also as the time that they're sent. So when you're looking at this Celebrate report, there are messages coming in all night long. But when you dig down deeper and you look at the SMS messages, you realize that there weren't any from, I think, 5:44 until 4:33. My time, 5:44 might be wrong. They may have been later. And so, you need the tower. You need to connect to the tower. So it was kind of supported by, okay, the battery likely died. And then he later found evidence that it hadn't, which is fine. It is what it is. I understand that. You know, it would have been nice had we known that before I sat down in the rotunda of the courthouse and talked to him a few minutes before he was supposed to testify, that he changed his mind.
And was that so? Like you guys during the July hearings, which I attended as well, you and Cecil had a pretty epic debate about the number of texts that flooded in, the significance of iMessages versus SMS. You know, and I realized at that point what you were saying that, you know, Cecil, his heart was in the right place. I mean, you can tell that guy really put a lot of work into understanding all of the technology, you know, like, but you could also tell that he just hadn't reached kind of the level of understanding that maybe others in the industry might have with respect to what he's looking at in terms of being able to interpret the data he's looking at, which I think is ultimately what leads to that issue with like, oh, well, turns out the battery wasn't dead. The battery was very much alive. So that creates this entirely new issue for you guys to figure out what in the world happened in that 11 hours to where this phone is not connecting to that tower and these messages aren't pouring in. So like, and as a defense attorney, we are forced to be objective. I try to explain this to people all the time. They're like, oh, you're not objective, you're a defense attorney. I'm like, no, that is literally the definition of our job. We have to be, we have to think of every possibility like under the sun, because it's the state that is myopic. Once they hone in on a suspect, that's it, to the exclusion of everything else. That one person and their theory, that's all they think about, and that's it. We have a very different job. So when you guys find out that these text messages flood in, and then when did you guys hire Eldridge? Like in February?
I believe we hired her in July.
Okay.
Right after those, yeah, we hired her right after those hearings, because when, and let me say this, I don't fault Chris Cecil for, you know, he dug down deeper, new software became available. He dug deeper and realized that the battery didn't die, and it turned, and that was correct.
Yeah, I respected the hell out of the fact that he continued to he wanted to keep running the phone. He like when Celebrate would update, he wanted to create new reports. I mean, he wanted to get the information. He wanted to mine the information, obviously hoping that they're going to get things that help their case, you know, but whatever the motive is, it doesn't matter. He was still putting in the work and still trying to get the data. So yeah, from that perspective, you know, I had no beef with him. You know, I mean, the timing of it is where the issue is, right? I mean, they had the phone in their possession for a long, long time, you know, and that's where the issues kind of arise in this case. It's like, why weren't you doing this years ago, man? Like, why are, you know, so that's.
And I've got a question, but I don't know if you finished where you were going with yours before I go to another one.
Jump in.
So, you know, I don't know if the heavier your practice, and if you're not involved with true crime, you might not watch other trials, but a lot of America watched the Murdaugh trial. So in that trial, data was everything. They tracked his every move. They could see when someone's battery went down. They can see when a phone turned left, when a phone turned right, when the phone tried to communicate but couldn't get something out, when someone picked it up. So the lack of that type of detail, I was kind of pulling my hair out like, well, shouldn't they know what the battery life was at any given time? And my other question in that same vein was about, I always thought, couldn't there have been a jammer used, a device, whatever kind, a box, a bag, whatever, that just prevents the signal, and then it got taken out? Was that type of detail not available like we saw in Murdaugh? And was a jammer something that seemed like a viable possibility?
I'm making some notes because a couple of things that relates back to. I think I have one of my kids like kindergarten pencils here. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, so first of all, I watched the Murdoch documentary with one of my kids, but when was that?
The trial took place, I want to say, in 2022. Don't quote me on that. But
Seems about right.
and he had a speedy demand in that. So that thing went to trial pretty quickly.
The murder occurred June of 2021.
Okay, so yeah, and like I think the trial happened in June of 20 or in 2022.
He was convicted in March of 2023.
Okay, all right. So I guess it took a little longer to get to trial than I thought, but I just wanted to add one thing about that Murdoch trial. That was the only case, the first and only case that I'm aware of, where the state was able to establish the time of death based exclusively on cell phone data. They were able to use the last time that Maggie and Paul had used their phones
and charged their phones.
And right. So they were using their historical data in terms of every time Paul's phone got around 6%, he plugged it in historically, always. So when that wasn't taking place and they knew that he had plans from his text messages, he was supposed to be going with a friend that evening. So they were able to literally establish a time of death, which really was the first time I had seen them use a cellular device to establish a time of death, where traditionally you're hoping that a medical examiner is going to be the one who can at least give you a window, based on lividity and other factors that they're typically looking at. So yeah, just kind of like that phone, which was your baby, like that was your area. You had so much going on with that phone. I mean, what did Eldridge tell you in terms of her ideas to why that phone may not have connected to that tower for all that time?
Well, I mean, it didn't have service for a multitude of reasons. It was out of the area. We know it wasn't off. It could have been, under a piece of metal or in some kind of a Faraday bag or something similar.
And that's a jammer for people that don't know. That's what I was asking about.
Yeah, right. Thanks. There are a lot of reasons it wouldn't necessarily connect to the tower. I mean, everyone has been in a building and there's an area in the building where you don't have service. If I'm in my bedroom, in my bed, my iPad doesn't always connect to the Wi-Fi. But if I go, to the chair on the other side of the room, it does. So, it could just be location. It could be a lot of things. We don't know. One of the things that I feel like they're really starting to do with cell phone data is use it to kind of establish patterns of life. Like you said, every time the phone's at 6%, it gets charged in. Yep. I mean, the amount of data that is collected on your cell phone. I mean, I was turning things off right and left as I'm going through this trial, like, oh my gosh, this is all out there. And if for some reason someone ends up with my phone, they're going to, all of my life is on my phone.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just kind of disconcerting. My kids love it, right? They're, they've got their app for this that tracks this and that and that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? But that's cool for them. I'm a different era. So it's used to, establish those patterns of life and things like that. I don't know that we got a lot of data, and I think a lot changed, Allie, to pick up on what you said, or Bob, sorry. I can't remember who said it.
It's okay.
About not only what is collected, but what you can find, right? Because like you said, they've got these companies and they have whole companies to figure out what's on your iPhone. There are all these different databases, wall files, that collect data. Data is oftentimes collected in a couple different places, but you don't always know what you're looking at. And so I think a lot changed from 2017 when ISP originally got the phone, and 2021 when everything was going on with Murdoch. And I applaud Chris Cecil. I think Chris Cecil's a good guy. I think he's, I think he worked hard. I think he was very thoughtful and worked hard and wanted to do a good job.
And when you say the thing he did at the end,
Cecil.
I'm assuming it was him, but I don't know who it was, that all of a sudden went out and Googled and came in and testified to counter your expert. Is that Cecil? Okay, so
Yeah. So
I was going to say, why don't you let people know what that's about and how you felt about the judge's ruling on that?
I can't talk about. She ruled the way she thought was the right ruling.
Right, and Jennifer is following their rules of ethics. You are not supposed to.
I can respect that.
We have a judge,
and I think it's hard to sit on the bench and call those shots. You're.
I mean, it's definitely hearsay, is all I'm saying,
if you will.
So my strong position is that is hearsay, and it should have never gotten in. But go ahead.
Yeah, that'll be an issue, I presume, on appeal for the appellate lawyers. But anyway, so according to the state, Libby's phone was under her shoe, under Abby's body, from 3:50 p.m. on February 13th until the bodies were found at about 12:15 p.m. on February 14th. And you can't see the phone. They didn't find the phone until they had moved the body. You couldn't see the phone under the bodies. So nothing should have happened that involved human interaction with that phone. If you believe the state's timeline, that would be impossible, right? So we knew that headphones were plugged in to the phone at 5:44 p.m. on the 13th and unplugged at 10:32 on the p.m. on the 13th. There is no way. I mean, here's my phone. I'm going to put the back towards you. But there's no way that this accidentally gets plugged in. That doesn't happen without some kind of human interaction. And to us, we felt very strongly that destroyed the state's timeline. And we also knew that they didn't know that. So, we had taken Chris Cecil's deposition, and, we walked through very carefully everything in his report. And, and he volunteered, audio output in. And he said, I don't know what that means.
Yeah, he did.
And that was in his deposition in September. And so we knew, or, unless they were going to go do more research. And again, I respect them for doing research. I think Chris Cecil really wanted to get the right answer. But so we knew that they didn't know that. And so we had Stacey Eldridge testify. We left that for the last thing for the jury to hear. We had her plug it in. We had her unplug it, had her kind of throw it around a little bit to show that connection. And, I think the last question I planned, but you know how that works. That's never your last question, right? But was, is there any way to explain this other than human interaction with that phone? And she said no. And we had subpoenaed Chris Cecil and their other expert to testify immediately after, because I didn't want them to go home and do a Google search and come up with something about why this might happen.
Right. And that was Brian Bunner, right?
Yeah, Brian Bunner.
Yep.
Yeah. And so as it happened, the judge took a 15-minute recess, and I saw them over there on their phones. I watched them do it. And I'm like, no, this is not happening. And so, you know, Chris Cecil ended up testifying that he did a Google search. And I think he said, I mean, I was so, it is a professional moment that I will never forget. You know, I'll never forget my direct examination of Stacey Eldridge. I sat down, Bob, you were there. I don't know if you could tell, my leg would not stop shaking. You know, I thought in my heart, I thought, wow, I think this is it. I think we just, there's the reasonable doubt right there. If
Tell the people what it was about her testimony that made you feel that way.
Because someone else is interacting with that phone. Someone is interacting with that phone when they admit Richard Allen wasn't there. He never went back. Someone else is there, or wherever the girls are, or wherever the phone is, interacting with that phone. And
you could have a phone in a faraway bag or in a jamming device, or a jamming device activated, and plugging in and unplugging is not a signal. You're not needing a tower, an internet. That's something literally attached to the device. So that's one of, you know, if there's a jammer being used, one of the things that actually would show up where,
Yep.
you know, nothing else would be connecting.
And not only that, but when you plug the headphone in, and it literally says wired headphones in, when you swipe right far enough in the spreadsheet that is created. And what that has the effect of doing is silencing the phone. So a phone from Abby's, or from, I'm sorry, a phone call from Libby's grandmother comes in at within milliseconds of the headphones being plugged in. And if that your screen lights up, you see a phone, you plug the headphones in, it doesn't ring. You can't hear it.
Right. And you know, on the old phones, they had that little dot in the back. It would turn red if there was water damage. Were you guys able, obviously not knowing he was going to, being Bunner is the witness who testified about the water?
Chris Cecil.
Not knowing that he was going to say that could have come from water damage that got in there. Were you ever able to inspect the phone to see if there was evidence of water damage?
We were not.
So,
I mean, there are pictures of it. They introduced it in evidence, but in terms of us conducting an independent examination, we didn't. You know, Chris Cecil, I think what he said was, I was so incensed. That kind of clouds my memory a little bit. I think what he said is he found it on an Apple discussion group.
I found it as well. After that, I looked. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know, if I put on an Apple discussion group that Richard Allen is innocent, does that come into evidence?
I know. That's why I'm saying that is hearsay.
Yeah.
And it's not tested. It's not, it's literally garbage. It's literally nothing.
Yeah. We don't know who said it. We know nothing about that person. Chris Cecil did a great job in his reports. He had scientific articles he attached to his reports, you know, and he did that for a reason, because that's testable, right? They're peer reviewed. They did testing. You know, to come in and say some random individual on an Apple discussion group said this is just crazy. Is that where we're at in our system of justice? This isn't something that experts rely on. You know, they rely on science, they rely on testing, they rely on the data. And to come in on an Apple discussion group has no place in a court of law.
So you were saying that one of, sorry, babe, that she was saying that one of her, that you were going to like look back on that moment. Are you speaking of when you asked Cecil the question? Tell the people a little bit about how that felt and how that went down.
Well, you know, there was a lead up, and we talked about why he had done the scientific research, why he included those, because of all those things I just said. We talked about, you know, information on the internet and how it's not reliable. You know, that there's all kinds of false information on the internet. And, you know, I didn't have this phone. I can't go do an extraction. They had it, the state police, and they had that phone for 7.5 years. For 7.5 years, they could do any testing they wanted. And presumably they did everything they thought they should. And then he's going to come in after a 5-minute Google search and try to sway this jury?
Well,
so I think my last question was, you know, you've had this phone for 7.5 years. I can't keep my hands still. I'm still kind of flustered. You've had this phone for 7.5 years, and you want to come in and talk to this jury about your 5-minute Google search?
And so I've got, and I'll never forget that moment during that trial, because you know, as attorneys, trial attorneys, we've been there, where you get that thing and it just blows your hair back. It takes the wind out of your sails and it takes you by surprise, even though you know that as soon as that came out, Mcleland had to have turned around and glared at Mullins and Cecil and said, figure this out on the break. And then so
Sure.
they run out there, you know, they're Googling it. The first thing that pops up, like the minute I walked out of the courtroom, I Googled it, and it came up on my AI that, oh, water damage and dirt. So, but to ask a question about the point that you just made, did they actually have Libby's phone for 7 years, or were they just using the extractions? Like, you know what I'm saying? Did they have the physical device?
Mm-hmm.
So
they had the phone. They admitted it. Yeah, they had it the whole time. They admitted it in the evidence. They sent it off somewhere, I think in Virginia, for Customs and Border Patrol. Someone did an extraction.
I mean, I've seen those extractions, and they can be very, very detailed. And it just didn't seem like the state had used all the possible parameters, or I don't know. It just didn't seem as detailed as it could have been.
And, you know, again, when you look at it was on the Knowledge C database. And that's why, you know, Bob, you had your show that day that I cross-examined Chris Cecil, and my paralegal sent me a text and said, Bob Mata said you're setting a trap. And I said, yes, I am. Yes, we are. Because he'd done great work. He'd done this spreadsheet on everything that happened on the phone on a second-by-second basis, and had it color-coded where it came from. And in audio output in and audio output out was on the spreadsheet. And so I had a part of that, and I got it into evidence while he was testifying, because I knew I wanted that in, and I got him to, you know, he admitted. I didn't get him to admit. He did that because I think he's an honest guy. You know, yeah, this is all accurate. It's reliable. I wouldn't change anything. And so that was on there, and we were able to pull that out, his own evidence, with Stacey Eldridge, and go through and explain then what it meant. And so all of that data was on the Knowledge C database, and you just had to swipe right on the spreadsheet. It was in row like triple T.
I have to say, I'm not sure that they didn't know as much as they might have, you know, I'm suspicious that they might have done some, you know, non-report based questioning of someone somewhere and didn't want to find something that was going to do exactly what you were able to do before they came up with their mishigas. But, you know, if they sent it out to the feds and to border control, I just can't believe that they didn't ask what that was about and what that could have come from. I think they were hoping you guys would miss it.
Yeah, I think if that were true, though, they would have had a better answer than the Apple discussion group.
That's true.
Right. That's the whole thing. Like,
you're right.
Cecil's not going out into the rotunda of the courtroom,
right,
or the courthouse, and Googling that. They would have had an answer, and they would have just held it pat until that happened on direct of Stacey. But in terms of, I mean, that answer, what drove me nuts personally was that, especially with iPhone devices, like if you've ever traded in a phone, like they know immediately if there's been water damage. Like the part of that assessment of the phone and the fact that they had this theory that the killer had the girls cross the
Great
river
point.
and they never saw fit to getting that phone tested to see if in fact it had water damage blew my mind.
I think if it did, they would have put it in the report.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Let's say the phone let's say they crossed the river. Let's say the phone had water damage. So, they crossed the river sometime between 2:30 and 3:30 maybe. Well, that phone was receiving messages. It was connected to the tower, it was receiving messages until at least 5:44, and I think longer. And so your water damage fails, in my opinion.
And you likely would have seen that alert come on a lot sooner if that were the reason for it.
Yeah, it doesn't take 2.5, 3, 4 hours for water damage to kick in.
No, it would kick in immediately. And the way that Mcleland tried to address that very briefly in closing was when he shows the picture of Abby, I believe, and he says, "Oh, you can see here's the phone, and you can see it's got dirt." Like the only way he addressed the whole thing, he's like, "There's water on it. You can see water on it and dirt." And that was it. That was how he addressed it. Like very incredibly briefly during the closing argument. And the reality is if that phone was under Abby for all those hours, it's not going to be getting wet. It's not going to have dew on it. It's under a shoe under her body. So there's like that. And if your phone, if you've ever had water damage to your phone and it shuts down, if in fact it does dry out, which typically all of us that are old heads know, oh, you got to put it in rice. If you put it in rice, that'll help dry the phone out. But when the phone, if it does in fact dry out, that phone does not just pop back on. You have to manually turn the phone back on.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
And Jennifer, you just said it was getting messages after it allegedly went through the river, across the river.
Yeah.
So there was no water damage or it didn't cross the river at that time.
Yeah. And some random piece of dirt magically made its way into the audio output at 5:44.
Right.
And it's even more magical that it made its way
fell out.
Right. It falling out of the port is the really magical part. That's the part where I was just like, so yeah, I mean, look, and like you said, and no matter what people have said about me, like for the last 2 years, I want justice for those two girls. I want to be able to trust a verdict that comes down, and people that are deciding to ignore facts that exist in this case in order to support a position just are not searching for the truth in this case. And whatever the truth may be, I mean, I'm here for it. But this concept that things like that were ignored by not only by really the only people that matter, which are the 12 people that sat in that box that came back with a conviction, which has to tell you that thing that Cecil did in those 15 minutes was effective enough to wipe out what should have been clear-cut reasonable doubt in this case.
Despite the logic not flowing. I wanted to just go back to the geofencing. So kind of two-part question. One, what what evidence would you have gotten in? Could you have used it? And was the geofencing and the tower dumps used to clear by law enforcement to clear others?
It's kind of hard. I don't know. The long silence is me searching through my head through terabytes of data, right? I don't know that they used it to really clear anybody. I mean, they probably did. There are so many, 14,000 tips, right? I'm sure at some point they did use it to clear people who were called in on those tip lines. I don't know how serious any of those tips that they used to clear it was. One thing that would have been really helpful is they can do a drive study. And they have equipment that they put in their car and they drive around and map out where you get a signal from the cell tower. And they didn't do it in this case. That would have been tremendous evidence to have. And you can't go back and recreate it, 7.5 years later. That would have been really incredible evidence to have because, the fact is that the phone didn't connect to the tower for that period of time. And why didn't that happen? Well, if we had a drive study, we would know where there are areas where her phone would not connect to the tower. And maybe
so she could have been nearby in a nearby location and then
or far away.
Or far away, but right.
I mean, the Apple Health data, there, 2 flights climbed. It can be up. They said it could be down. If it's down, 2 flights down gets you to the access road and a vehicle, and off they go. And who knows where they could have gone?
Right. So
And
if the
let me stay on that, because when you guys argued that motion, when Mcleland sought to have that barred as being brought into evidence, and I'm specifically talking about the geofencing, he didn't put an expert on. He merely made this kind of bald assertion that there was only one tower in Delphi in Carroll County at that point, or in Delphi proper, and that geofencing area encompassed the entire town of Delphi. So he said that that was his argument. And so saying that it had no real relevance or no material in terms of it had no material value because of the fact that it encompassed the entire town. When he made that argument, Allison and I had a live, and I'm like, he is just flame thrown ever being able to use geofencing in any case ever again, because he now is on the record as of having said that. And, for me, did you guys see anything in the data that rebutted what he was saying? Did that data exist, or was that a legitimate argument from him? I always wonder.
Well, I want to follow up real briefly when you say that precludes him from using geofencing, kind of like composite sketches, right? Apparently those can never be used again.
Right. There was a couple of things he did that with.
Yeah. And it was, he put it on his witness list. If it's not relevant, why is it on his witness list? I think it was relevant to the point of, what possible suspects were there? What did the state do to eliminate them? And to the integrity of the investigation, which is always admissible, always relevant. And I was kind of taken aback by that. That seemed kind of a no-brainer. Of course we get to talk about what they did to investigate this. Kind of of course the composite sketches are coming in.
Right. So if the geofencing had gotten in, was that the evidence people didn't get to hear, that their phone, Abby's phone or Libby's phone didn't hit the tower, or was there other evidence that you would have introduced had the geofencing not been excluded?
I think we probably shouldn't get into that too much.
Understood.
Sorry, I'm trying to.
No, and you're doing the right thing. And obviously, Bob and
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That for sure. Bob, if you don't have something else, I've got something along the same lines with while we're on the kind of data stuff.
Babe, I always have something else. I've just been quietly sitting here.
Well, you have anything else about the geofencing or?
Well, I mean, in terms of that, no. I mean, we'll move on. But so specifically, but I want to stay on the phone because I have a couple of questions. And sitting in that courtroom, Jennifer, and you know how many times the videos were shown. So we first see the original video. And I remember, you know, everybody that's followed this case for all these many years, we've always seen the clip. We've always heard that, you know, that the actual video was somewhere between 43 and 48 seconds long. And when they played it, when Mcleland finally played that thing, and I'm sitting there in the courtroom, I think I was in the second row, had a pretty good view of the screen, and I'm trying to take every second of that thing in. I had never laid eyes on it, and I was dying to see it. And so I'm looking at it, and I don't see anybody behind Abby when I'm watching the original. And I'm like, and it didn't seem like it was 43 seconds long. I remember walking out of the courtroom. I'm like, was that really 43 seconds long? I was like, maybe I was just trying to bring everything in, I was trying to see it all. I was trying to listen to it all. I was trying to take it all in. And maybe the time just, you know, didn't operate how it normally does. But I didn't see anybody behind her. I'm like, okay, maybe I just wasn't looking hard enough. So then we see a second version, which is the enhanced video. And I'm like, wow, I see the dude now. And then we see the stabilized video, which was a third version, which completely blew my mind, because at that point, when I'm looking at it, it almost seemed as if they were able to access the back camera and the front camera both, because you just saw things that you did not see in either of the two earlier versions that we had seen. So I guess my question to you is what is your understanding? And I heard what their guy testified to about how he came up with that video, but what is your understanding? Do you have a better understanding of exactly how or where that stabilized video came from?
And what we were seeing?
Sure. The stabilized view I've watched that video hundreds of times. I've listened to it hundreds of times. And so the stabilized view wasn't much different from the video I saw. The audio, I think that the audio should have spoke for itself, in like the idea of someone saying what they thought Abby said.
And I would say typically in the law, that is one of the things that the judge doesn't allow an expert to testify to. The jurors are supposed to use their own ears and decide what's being said.
Yeah.
And he wasn't an expert.
Or
right.
A layman.
He was a cop.
So it wasn't that different from the video I've watched so many times, but I've had the benefit of viewing it, like I said, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So it to me, that didn't make much of a difference.
I mean, for those of us that saw the videos twice.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to hear you say that, because
every single person in that courtroom, when I left and I'm like talking to Lee and Andrea, I'm like, was that thing was it just me, or was that thing unbelievably different? in terms of what we saw. But again, you know, like I'm having to hearken back to days prior when they showed the first enhanced video. And then I'm trying to remember what I saw. And I mean, to me and to all of us, we felt that this thing was like vastly different, you know? So like, I didn't come trying to report something that wasn't true in my mind, and everyone else that I spoke with in that gallery that saw it was like, wow, like, where did that thing come from? Like, how are, like, it seemed like there was a portion of that video where Abby's walking towards Libby that I just did not see on the enhanced version. Like it was just, it was different. Like the whole voice recognition thing is a whole different ball of wax. Like allowing whoever, I forget who was their guy, the video guy, the guy who, what's his face? The dude who recognized Rick's voice and had listened to 700 hours and said that.
Oh, Brian Harshman.
Yeah, Harshman. So Harshman, like allowing him to say that he's reached the conclusion that that's Rick Allen's voice on that video will never not stun me in terms of that being allowed in a court of law.
Considering the enhancement and not knowing how that affected the sound of the voices.
Yeah, and you know, the thing that Jennifer's talking about is when you have Liggett on the stand and he's talking about the things that he allegedly hears Abby say. Now, I want to ask you flat out, he had the ability to be able to listen to them with headphones. Are the things that he's saying that Abby said, or is that legitimate? Did you hear those things? I'm assuming you listened to it with headphones.
I listened to it a lot. It's debatable, you know. Here's the problem: you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. Once someone says this is what it says, it's hard to hear anything else, no matter what's actually on the audio, right? And so, you know, there have been a lot of iterations of what we thought Abby may have said.
In a new trial, you guys have to ask for the jurors to get their own headphones and listen to it themselves so that the state can't say there's something special that you can hear with the headphones on that you can't.
Right.
But and then did the defense not have access to the physical phone in order to run independent extractions and testing?
We did not. But, you know, not everyone, you have to be in law enforcement to even get the software to do an extraction.
Right. Or I mean, we've had, you know, like experts that have the software that, you know, run the extractions to make sure they're expanding every possible parameter. Because if the police set the parameter, like I only want to see, you know, X, Y, and Z, or there's something that they don't know. But I think that your expert had said that the extraction, the very last extraction, was of everything a full kind of extraction.
Right. So there was nothing on the phone that made us think that they had hit anything or not got anything that was gettable at that point.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of the chatter, and it's nothing more than that out in the social media world. You know, obviously there's been tons of speculation that video was somehow doctored or was made up from whole cloth, and all those types of theories are out there. I've never given them any credence. I would assume that in terms of the video, I mean, were you guys able to do through Eldridge, was she able to do anything with that video in terms of being able to validate that what was on that video, that it was in its original format, that there was no photoshopping done or anything of that nature? I mean, was she able, I mean, without having the device, can you even do that type of thing?
I mean, we had the video from the extraction, and there was no evidence that that video was anything other than what it was.
Okay, fair enough. So with the going back to the phone, and you had mentioned the Snapchat, there was I think it was Brian Bunner. It might have been Cecil now. I don't think I one of the two of them, where there was like the discussion about there was an original on the phone, there wasn't an original on the phone. You guys had the phone. Some of the Snapchats or all the other Snapchat pictures except the one on the bridge were on the phone. Can you explain all of that for us?
And let me specify. She's talking about that the photo of Abby alone on the bridge that was somehow out in the Snapchat world, but the original was not found in the Snapchat cache or on the phone itself, saved in photos. And the question of where did that photo come from?
Right. I mean, that's so the picture of Abby on the bridge, and that was all over the I think I got it off the internet before I entered my appearance. Like, you know, some of this stuff that I looked at, I found on the internet. So anyway, the picture of Abby on the bridge, every other picture that Libby posted from Snapchat was in the Snapchat cache or in her photos that we could tell, except that one picture of Abby on the bridge. And that the law enforcement learned about that picture from Kelsey German, who said she saw it. And so if you look at what was entered into evidence at the top left, it says 7 hours ago. And she said, I think she said she saw it at 9:05, as you know, and so they hearkened it back to 2:05. The photo had been taken at 2:05. Now, my understanding is, you know, Snapchat doesn't say posted 7 hours and 25 seconds ago or 7 hours and 12 minutes ago. So I don't know how accurate 2:05 is. But where did it come from? It came from her Snapchat account, but not off her phone.
I mean, is there any way that it could have, like, that's the thing, like that? Did you ask Eldridge? Like, all right, because like, look, I am admittedly a complete Luddite when it comes to Snapchat. Like, I was going to my 18-year-old and asking her, okay, you have to explain Snapchat to me as if I'm 5 years old because I don't understand any of it. I don't understand how it saves pictures. She's like, well, there's a setting where you can save it to your photos or you can send it out. Like, because the thing that kids like about Snapchat is that shit disappears. Like, you know, it's like messages disappear, photos that you send disappear. So, you know, I was like, is there some way that it could have been taken on that phone by Libby wherein it somehow disappeared without being traceable in any way, shape, or form? Does that exist as a possibility?
Not that I'm aware of, and not that any expert or investigator is aware of.
And all the other Snapchat photos were on her device.
Or in her Snapchat cache.
Yeah, that's always going to be a mystery to me. I just don't.
Mm-hmm. And where did the original come from again? Snapchat?
No one knows. No one knows.
How did you get the original?
Well, I don't have the original. What we have is the screenshot that Kelsey took of Snapchat.
Did anyone have the original? Because from what I gather, you can put it out to the public, which means that all of your friends in Snapchat see it, or you can send it directly to an individual, right? So one of those two things exists. And so but that still wouldn't be the original, right? I mean, that would be a copy of the original. If you've sent it to somebody, like, does that person, in order to maintain it on in their photo roll, they have to screen grab it. So that means, like, if it came through and like Kelsey's like, oh, this is a cute picture of Abby, and she screen grabs it. She's like, I've got it now. I'll keep it in my picture roll, which I think kids do all the time. Like if they get good shot. So, but like, I mean, and I think that you made the suggestion that, isn't it seem likely that maybe somebody else who had access to Libby's snap, aside from Abby, who we know had access to it, logged in and somehow took that picture? I mean, that's not a crazy theory. And frankly, it's the only thing that seems that could have happened. Am I missing something on that?
No, I mean, look, I made the same calls to my kids. Explain this to me. How does this work? Right. And then I got some validation, but yeah, that's the only explanation we've ever been able to come up with, that I've ever heard anyone come up with, is someone else had access to her account.
Yeah.
Because you got a lot of jury questions after, and I was trying to look through my notes because I don't know how I didn't take it down. It was either Cecil or Bunner about the knowledge C and about the Snapchat. And I'm wondering if you can recall feeling like, all right, the jury gets it. Like, this is because they did ask a lot of technical questions about that. Do you recall? Do you recall that?
I recall a lot of questions. I'd have to go back. I took pretty good notes. I'd have to go back and look at them to remember all of those. But my recollection is that there was a juror, maybe an alternate juror, who seemed to have a lot of background knowledge about some things that kept popping up into a lot of the questions. I mean, they asked really good, thoughtful, insightful questions a lot of the time.
And do you recall that giving you guys, making you feel like that was benefiting the defense?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And maybe what you're thinking is right, that those could have been coming from alternates.
Well, I think that there was a juror in the back row that was seated towards the middle. That was the guy that was sending all the super techie questions out. Like, it seemed to have a real deep knowledge base of kind of technology like that. And it's like, frankly, I thought that particular individual in my mind was going to end up being the foreperson of the jury. I frankly was stunned who ended up being the foreperson. And this is just me being a lawyer sitting in there, because you know how it goes. You're always sitting there during the course of a trial trying to figure out which jurors you think you've got, which jurors, that juror made eye contact with me. Oh, that one gave me a little bit of a smile. Like all the little things that we as lawyers are always trying to do to try to figure out if we're making points with jurors. And like that particular individual ended up being the foreperson really surprised me, because I just didn't see it coming. But then again, I'm always wrong about juries. I mean, that's the one thing that is always true in the law, is that you never know what a jury is going to do. And, but I felt the same way. I thought that so many of the questions were thoughtful. I thought that it really illustrated that they were paying attention during the entire trial. I felt, I observed them every day. I always kept an eye on the jury. There were no nodding off jurors. There were none that seemed disinterested. And to the credit of both sides during the trial, you guys did not belabor witnesses. You didn't have experts on the stand unnecessarily for 6 hours, just wringing the pathos out of a person, or just, trying to get every question you could possibly ask under the sun. You guys moved it along, which is always a testament to a trial that was well litigated. And I thought that both sides, in terms of really kind of having to rush to trial, did yeoman's work. Like, I really thought that you guys both put on a really strong case, both sides. You know, it's like I was sitting there when they came back with the verdict, and you know, I'm like, and I'm of the mindset that, you know, I was thinking, wow, I think I can see a world in which they're going to come back not guilty with reasonable doubt. I think that the defense, despite the handicaps, which we won't get into, which will be made clear in the appellate briefs when they're filed, but you know, despite the handicaps that you guys were presented with, you went in and did uh, a bang up job on putting forth the defense, which was really relegated to just reasonable doubt. I mean, that's what you guys were left with. That's what you had to do. And I thought that you did just a great job with working with what you had. And I remember when they read the verdict, and like my initial feeling was, and you know how it is, Jennifer, like as an attorney, when you've tried a case and you're standing there and your heart's going a million miles an hour, you know, you're feeling every bit of it. You know, you can only imagine what it's like to be a defendant in that moment in time. And then they read it, and like I was hearkening back to it when I did the live that night. And the only way that I could describe it was that I wasn't surprised when they came back guilty, and that in my mind, where I would have been surprised is if they had acquitted him. And I think that that's just
Being
kind
beat
of
down by
part
the
and
system.
parcel of the trade that we're in as defense attorneys. We're kind of accustomed to getting the guilty verdicts because that's typically what happens, you know? So man, it was like what was that feeling? I want to try to touch upon that a little bit. You know, obviously the disappointment, but you know, in terms of that feeling, because I guess I just want to flat out ask you, you know, because we all have defended people in our careers that we know are not innocent, who, you know, they have powerful evidence that our clients are like, I'm going to trial no matter what, and that's their right. And we as their attorneys have to go in and do our job, make sure that our clients get a fair trial, make sure they understand the law, make sure the cops did their jobs right, make sure the prosecutors are doing, you know, we go in and we try the case as diligently as we can, and we've done our job, and knowing that the state had the evidence to convict. This case, from an outsider's perspective, did not seem to be that. You know, for me, when I looked at the probable cause affidavit, my feeling was always that it leaned innocent. And that was based on my career as a trial lawyer and as looking at something objectively and saying, okay, well, that's not enough evidence. When they're talking about mere presence and they're talking about an unspent casing, which is testing that is, you know, just not typically used in cases to convict people as the primary piece of evidence to get a conviction on. And you have a statement by Richard Allen putting himself at the bridge. I'm like, all right, they're going to have to come up with more. And like, and this is the way that my mind was running with this thing when the PCA finally got unsealed. I'm like, man, their hope is, it has to be that they're going to uncover more evidence when they get into Richard Allen's devices. They're going in with this thing where you've got Carter sitting there saying, when they're asked, do you have the right guy? And his answer is, well, the judge issued the arrest warrant. That is not the kind of answer you want to hear from law enforcement. Like, yeah, we got the dude and we're sure of it. You know, that kind of speaks volumes when you have a cop saying something like that to the press. So I'm like, all right, you know, like you make the arrest and you're confident. And I think that when they made the arrest, they were confident they had the right guy. I think in their hearts and their minds, they believed they had the right guy. I just wonder, from your perspective, I mean, I don't even know if you can answer. Like, I'm going to ask the question. I understand if you can't answer it. Do you believe that Richard Allen is factually innocent?
I can't say that. The rules of ethics
Okay.
Prevent her from
would
answering that.
be
But she can
protect-
answer how she felt when
But I can say, you know, I mean, I believe I believe in my client's innocence. He has maintained that. I think that there is so much reasonable doubt in this. And you asked, what does that feel like? It's gutting. This is like you said, there are a lot of lawyers. There aren't a lot of trial lawyers. And of those trial lawyers, not everyone is going to stand up and fight for someone accused of murdering 2 children. I believe very strongly in our case. I believe very strongly that there was reasonable doubt. And it was my job to show that to the jury. And we didn't. And it'll be a while to get over this. So
Yeah.
It's the worst feeling you can imagine. There are, finding out my dad died in a car accident. Those are the kind of moments that are just the worst moments of your life.
Well, we appreciate you sharing that. And now I feel bad jumping to another question.
No, please do.
I just wanted to circle back to the cell phone, and if Eldridge ever found some evidence on the phone or the extraction about what went in eventually coming out, especially considering it wasn't found with headphones plugged in.
Right. Well, the headphones were unplugged at 10:32.
Okay, so there was a specific notation of it being removed.
Yeah. So in at 5:44, out at 10:32. Headphones were never found. We don't know where she was or where the phone was when that happened. The only explanation, the only science-backed explanation is that headphones were plugged in.
And headphones were removed.
And headphones were unplugged. Yeah.
And then you handled the cross-examination of Riley Voorhees. Can you just tell people a little bit about what her testimony was all about? Or specifically dealing with the identification of who she saw.
Here's what's really fascinating in this case to me is they kept out the composite sketches that were on their witness list that were made, at the time or shortly thereafter. They kept those out. Not one person who came in the courtroom pointed at Rick Allen and said, he's the guy I saw on the trail that day.
And that's where I was going with this.
Not one of their witnesses testified it was Rick Allen. They never asked the question. Why didn't they ask the question?
So why do you think they did? And specifically on Voorhees, she said she was 5'7". She said he was taller than her. He said he had light brown hair, curly. You could see it outside of the hat. He was muscular and then not muscular. But a lot of things that, and 20 to 30 years old, a lot of things that do not indicate that it was Richard Allen. Why do you think the state did not ask the question?
I'm not going to ask a question if the answer hurts me. Nick Mcleland's a good lawyer. Stacy Diener's a good lawyer. James Luttrell is a good lawyer. And they're not going to ask a question if the answer hurts them.
And I'm sure you can't answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. Why didn't the defense ask? There was another witness, I think, but I don't think you handled it, so I can't ask about that. But there was a lot there that that indicated it kind of wasn't him. Why didn't the defense ask or have her stand next to Richard Allen and say, well, he's shorter than you, right?
Right. Well, look, Rayleigh Voorhees is friends with Kelsey German. They shared a look when Rayleigh left the stand. She looked over at Kelsey, nodded. And I'm not saying that there would be anything intentional, but there's a lot in 7.5 years, there's a lot of revisionist history going on.
So especially considering the relationship and your belief that this witness would not want to say anything that would damage the state's case, sounds like you're saying contributed to you not asking that additional question.
I don't know if it's that causational. I just think in 7.5 years, a lot can affect your memory. Right. And not that it would be intentional in any way. I'm not suggesting anyone would get up there and lie. But I think a lot of things could have affected her memory in 7.5 years.
And wanting to recreate it.
Yeah, you want to create it, and look, everybody wants to give the family an answer. So,
and it's much more telling to me that the state didn't ask. I mean, for sure. They've got every single witness that came in, they didn't ask. And when you're the defense, you don't want to ask a question you don't know the answer to. And like you're saying, with so much time going by, and someone might want to be like, I want to have gotten it right. So it might help them sort of recreate the memory in a way that makes it right, being Richard Allen.
Sure. And I'm not going to be in a courtroom and give them a composite of 12 people and say, was Bridge Guy one of these people? There's only one guy she can point to. Right? Everybody knows who Rick Allen is. Everyone knows who's been charged. So, yeah. And, none of the alleged eyewitnesses, none of the people who said they saw Bridge Guy gave a description that matched Richard Allen.
I don't remember in the closing, did either of the lawyers say the words, how come the state never asked any of these witnesses to identify Richard Allen? If he's Bridge Guy, if he's who they saw, and I just don't remember because I wasn't there and I only have memory of watching, everyone else's coverage.
I don't remember either. I'm sorry.
No,
I can't remember. I
probably wouldn't have remembered.
I don't know if Brad said it, but I've got two questions related to that. One, are you aware in the discovery, like typically what they do when you've got eyewitnesses in most cases, is, and if there has been a passage of time between when the crime occurs or the crimes, and they make an arrest, and typically they'll go back with a 6-pack, which is, law enforcement will put pictures of 6 kind of similar looking people, and they'll go to those witnesses and they'll say, hey, do you recognize any of these people? And then the witness will look at it and they'll either say yes or no or maybe, and then they'll indicate it on a 6-pack. Did those exist in this case? Did you see those? Did law enforcement do that as far as you know?
No, because Rick Allen came 5.5 years later. So that's why I think they were doing the composite sketches.
I'm talking about after Rick Allen is arrested. And so they go back, they call them, like around here and in other places, they call it a 6-pack. So they'll have 6 individuals, which will include the person they just arrested.
Nowadays, they do it as 6 separate photos, babe.
Right. So okay. Well, I think it's different everywhere, but it's more effective if it is a 6-pack where you have 6, like 6 separate pages. To me is weird because then you have to worry about, well, which one did you show first? Which, there's a lot of different problems with that. But so say you've got, so like, I'm going to assume that they didn't do that because like, that's where you're going back to a witness after 5.5 years and saying, hey, do you recognize any of these people? And then they're saying, oh my God, that's the guy, you know? So I'm assuming since you didn't see that didn't occur. All right. So because we had that in one of our cases, same thing. And it was a traditional 6-pack. No one identified our guy. And these were all people that laid like had a good view of the person. And the same thing happened with us. Like there was not one in-court identification by any of the eyewitnesses.
They kept out all the 6-pack viewings where they didn't
They
identify
kept
him.
that all out. So my next question is to follow up. Were you guys able to depose any of those eyewitnesses? And did you ask them the question at the depth? Because we don't get to depose people in Illinois. It's like,
we didn't in Georgia either.
Like, to me, it's a godsend to be able to depose people. Like, people just don't understand. Like, flying blind as a defense attorney, like based only on police reports and whatever our private investigator can get people to talk about, if they'll talk to him, is like what we're heading to trial with. You guys in Indiana, where you have the ability to be able to depose people under oath, get them on record of saying things. Did you guys depose any of the eyewitnesses?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you ask them if any of them could ID? Did you show them a picture of Rick and say, is this the guy you saw?
I don't think we did. Those were all done before I think I got involved. I mean, I read them all.
I'm definitely asking Andy and Brad.
I mean, and you could have the same risk there, but as far as somebody recreating it after the fact from the defense point of view, but I also find that extremely telling. They knew going in, they did not want to go showing before they arrested Richard Allen, before his face was made public, asking all of the witnesses, did you see this person? Because they knew no way in hell that they were going to identify him. And this brings me back to one of my other questions. I can't remember if it was during trial or pre-trial, but you specifically questioned the sketch artist about taking some of the sketches, and he said you never show the picture. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what was the huge bombshell that came out of that?
Well, the huge bombshell that is the rest of the criminal defense bar is probably cheering about, as if they could use it, right, is that composite sketches aren't evidence. Right. And not admissible. So all of my brethren in the criminal defense world are probably jumping up and down like, this is awesome. That composite sketch of my client isn't going to come into evidence. So that was a shocking revelation there, that it's an evidentiary tool, but not evidence.
Despite the fact that they have to sign so that it can be admitted as evidence.
Yes. According to their own professional rules of conduct, those all need to be signed for evidence, for a hearing. We went through all of those. And, you don't show pictures to eyewitnesses because that skews their memory, right? I mean, I presume that's why. And as we talked about at that hearing, he pretty quickly said, oh, it's okay, we can cheat. Let me show you this picture. And the witness said no. I mean, initially it seemed reluctant to do that because she said she hadn't looked at those pictures because she didn't want to, kind of shade her memory. And kudos to her for that. And it was the sketch artist who said, here, it's okay, we can cheat.
He seemed to not think you were going to have him balls to the wall, on that issue, because he was saying you don't do that. No, initially he was saying that's not something you do. I never would do that. And then you came out and had that boom.
Yeah, it was on video. Like you can't get away. He videotaped it. So yeah, that was the big moment that came out of that, is composite sketches are an investigatory tool and not admissible.
Yeah, and that he showed her had her look at the picture of Bridge Guy before she gave a video. Now, I wanted to move to Patrick Cicero. So can you remind everybody that was the state's blood spatter expert, what he testified about generally?
I'll do my best. It's hard to give a blow by blow over the month-long trial, but what Major Cicero testified to was, that the blood, the way the blood was on the girls, the movement of the blood, the placement of the blood, both girls, Libby was moved, Abby was moved, but maybe not geographically. Like the way it ended up kind of coming out was that maybe it almost sounded as if someone lifted her up by the trunk to cause the blood to flow over her face from her neck wound. And ultimately that's a lot, I think, and I can't remember if he testified to this in July or at the trial, a chaotic scene, a lot of movement at the scene. Rick Allen, Rick Allen is maybe 5'6",
Maybe.
and dragging a body around and lifting a body and dressing a body and in all of these things that he would have had to do, that there's so much chaos and physicality to that scene. It to me really is hard to believe that was one person.
Yeah.
Or 1 5 6 person.
And what about the well, let me ask you this. Was there anything specific with him that you would have raised but couldn't because of the pretrial rulings?
I don't think so.
Nothing like the F tree or was that
so there was a tree that had a mark. At one point it was an F, at one point maybe it was an L, but a very specific mark. Whether it was from being how it got on a tree, whether it was transferred or drawn, I don't, that is maybe a distinction without a difference, if you will. We couldn't talk about what an L might mean, an upside down L or an F might mean. That was precluded from the pretrial rulings, but I don't know that Major Cicero would have had any expertise to testify about that.
Okay, so it wouldn't necessarily have been with that witness where you couldn't kind of get into it. Now, many of us thought seeing Abby's body, that she was so white and so clean, she looked washed. Once I saw that image, in my mind, I decided Abby was the target. Abby's who this person focused on. Abby looks washed, cleaned, redressed, that it was screaming to me and some of the other lawyers in the courtroom that she really looked washed, not a speck of dirt, other than on her back, underneath. And there was also a sort of part where she was bloody. I can't remember where, the arms or the hands were pristine, I think. But where it almost looked like there was a shape of clean in the midst of all the blood that screamed also to us of seeming intentional. Does that speak to you at all, that as far as it's seeming to us like she looked like she was washed and cleaned and redressed and that the focus was on her?
the bodies were very different in how they were treated. You're right about your analysis of Abby's body. I wouldn't want to speculate as to meaning that we might be able to go into the future trial.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Completely understand. And that is what you should be doing. And like I said, Bob and I are all about, keeping something in your back pocket, even outside of the rules. It's good trial strategy. Is there anything to you, I guess, with the crime scene itself, what stood out to you, like the very, very most?
The sticks. The idea that these sticks were used to hide the bodies or cover the bodies, even, I think it was in July, Major Cicero testified, he was asked questions by Mr. Mcleland, about the sticks covering the bodies to hide them. And I asked him, I said, what percentage of the bodies did the sticks actually cover? And he said 3 to 5%. And I said 5? And he said 3. It was such a small amount, and their shapes. So that seemed intentional, not to hide, but to convey some meaning. And so it was the sticks that really, the first time I saw the photos, and I knew that they had existed, but
yeah, I was shocked because after the trial, the pictures did get released on social media completely and totally. And that was the first time that I saw how the sticks were laid. And and even in the courtroom, because I was in the courtroom when they were showing pictures, but I just, either I couldn't see how the sticks were, or from my position, but I was shocked at how much that screamed. It was like the exact same on both of them, like positionally speaking. And I just don't think anyone would think that that it was used to cover them. And from a legal perspective, that was one of the things Bob and I were screaming, like, the judge is making a mistake, and an appellate issue on, if you're going to let the state proffer a explanation for them, now you have opened the door. I think I screamed, they're opening the door. I can't remember what for specifically right now, but many, many times, that being one of them. You just gave the jury an explanation for those sticks. I have the right now to give them another explanation.
It was Cicero. Cicero's the one who said it. Like Cicero, like he said what Jennifer said, that in his estimation, the sticks were used to, and he had said it in July as well. He's like, well, from across the creek, the way that the sticks were placed, that they were enough to obfuscate what you were seeing across the river. So even though it wasn't, because I forget what you pinned him on. You pinned him on a percentage in terms of how much coverage there was. And I think you got him down to like somewhere under 5%.
She just said 3. She just told us.
Right, 3. So, like being on this side of it, and you guys were wisely not engaging in social media as the attorneys in it, because like what happened when the Franks memo dropped was, and I've explained this to people, that there were 2 cases, and it's very rare. It's very rare for the defense to put their entire theory of the case out there to the public before trial. We just rarely do it. It's like it's like a strategic move, and it's one of the things where that we as defense attorneys, it's one of the only advantages that we have, because going against the power and resources of the state is overwhelming. And the one thing that we do not have to tell them is our theory of the case, right? So a lot of times if we have a different theory, we'll hold it back. But this case and then the Karen Reed case, you had defense counsel for both of those clients come forward and lay out their entire theories of defense, and both were stunning, like in terms of what they were suggesting, like hard for people to digest. And I have to be honest, I went into the trial thinking that they had not developed any new evidence, and that I was somewhat relieved, as weird as this sounds, that you guys were not going to be able to bring in this Odinist theory that everybody on the other side of this thing was poo-pooing and was saying was insane, and satanic panic, and the defense made this shit all up, and all the things that were out there from these two warring sides, right? Because you had the exact same thing going on in the Karen Reed case, because there you had this massive conspiracy that included a house full of people and then a ton of law enforcement. So it's like, it's a tough sell, right? It's a tough sell to a jury, ultimately, at the end of the day.
But let me say, I know that there's been a lot of flack. I mean, it even came out at the sentencing and the press conference about the Odinism in that theory, and directed personally at the lawyers, which is something that I'm not used to.
Especially when it started with the state's investigation.
Well, that's what I wanted to say. We didn't, again, Brad and Andy didn't say, oh, well, this is Odinism. They didn't look at the crime scene photos and say, oh, yeah, that's
Odinism.
No. That first came up, I believe, from the U.S. Marshal's Office BAU report. And then other law enforcement endorsed that. The state police had talked to people experts, if you will, who in some way kind of endorsed that theory too. Like, we didn't come up, I'm fairly certain neither Brad or Andy, and certainly not me, had ever heard of Odin before this trial.
No, you guys didn't watch Vikings. Very good series.
Yes, I did not. Up in my bookshelf over there, I've got a number of books on Norse pagan religion now. That wasn't something we came up with or even thought about. It was Todd Click's letter to Nick Mcleland spelling it all out.
Yeah, that's what was so offensive about that press conference. It was just the what they were saying about you guys as the lawyers, when all you were doing was
your job.
But even beyond that, their own evidence suggested this, and the witnesses said the words that they said, and the did someone spit or not spit on someone, and was someone's, all of the things and such that were there came from their own investigation. So I'm sure.
Look, I did battle over the inner tubes for 2 years on that thing, trying to explain to people that this is not something that defense attorneys, and namely Brad and Andy, made up out of whole cloth. This came directly from the evidence that was provided to the defense by the state, and in my estimation, from 3 legitimate cops, that being Todd Click and Ferenczi and Kevin Murphy. Like, these guys were not some, schmuck cops. These were all longtime law enforcement, highly respected cops who felt very differently. And when you've got Todd Click seeing fit to hiring an attorney because he doesn't understand why they've arrested Rick Allen, and asking this attorney, well, how do I address this with the prosecutor in this case? I mean, that's mind blowing to me. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, like,
I've been practicing for 29 years in 3 different states. I've never heard of that happening.
me either.
Never heard of it. I mean, Todd Click paid an attorney with money out of his own pocket because he was so upset that their evidence seemingly was ignored and maybe they had the wrong person. You know, that's just unheard of. And he
I've
had
never seen it, never heard of it.
Courage and the tenacity to do that. And thank goodness he did. Because, you know, I'm not sure that evidence would have ever been revealed.
Yeah, and when you say the courage, I mean, you have to understand, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the people out here that are watching live with us and the people that will watch it later, that like you're going against the machine. like you're three cops, 2 at the point that Alan's arrested because Barency, you know, rest in peace, was shot and killed. But you know, you've got these guys that have to deal with the fact that Unified Command has decided that no, that's not legitimate. That's bullshit. We're not hearing it. We don't want you talking about it. And yet Todd Click had the courage to go forward with it anyway. I mean, it speaks volumes about a guy who's been in law enforcement for 20 plus years, felt that strongly about it. I mean, to me, that resonated because of exactly what you said, Jennifer. Cops don't do that. That is not what that is not how those agencies operate. They do not come in and say, look, man, y'all got it wrong. And did you see my evidence? Did you see what I sent you, man? Like I don't understand. You know what I'm like? Just explain to me how you're saying what you have on this guy is better than what I've provided you in terms of these other people. Like, you just don't see it. So for me, it was one of those situations where, and at that point when that thing dropped, I had never seen anything like it. 139 pages. I'm like, you know,
the Franks memo. Yeah. And you know, here's the thing too, like, you know, Todd Click, Kevin Murphy, they have friendships. They have colleagues that they are, that's hard for them. You know, they don't want to be that guy, but they came in and they testified truthfully, even though it was hard, they did the right thing. And I mean, I just can't say how much respect I have for them because I understand.
Did you think the charges against Click, now Click, for anyone who doesn't know, had been charged shortly before trial with crimes involving fraud, dishonesty, things of that nature. Did you guys have an opinion about the timing of that and the intent behind it?
I can't talk about any of that.
Got it.
I did. And I can talk about it. I feel that's what I'm saying, Jennifer. I mean, it's one of those things when you're looking at it, you know, from being inside the system for so many years and just knowing how cops operate and knowing that they have those relationships and those friendships and those colleagues that, you know, they have to deal with on a daily basis, and knowing what the blowback on that's going to be, and having the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to do what I feel is right here. To dismiss it offhand as nonsense to me is ridiculous. Like, and I just, you know, it was frustrating on this side of it, like trying to kind of temper that storm and try to engage in meaningful conversation with people on the other side of it that just weren't willing to have it because they just dismissed the whole Odin theory is utter bullshit.
and just close their eyes
ridiculous.
to any facts like they did at the press conference. It was appalling, and I hope you guys got. I mean, there were a lot of people watching that live that were like, you basically just saying how disgraceful what the police were saying, and how they were trying to paint the defense team, knowing what we all know, but it's what we see them do. They just say whatever they want to say and pretend that it's true. And
I've never seen a
There's-
press conference like that. Like
Yeah.
like typically you have the prosecutor come out and say some very quick words. Look, we appreciate that the jury did their job. They listened to the evidence. We believe that they came back with the correct verdict. And then they thank law enforcement for their hard work. And then they step aside. And then you'll typically get a cop just come up there and say, "Oh, we're relieved. We're relieved that the jury came back with the verdict because we believe that we had the right guy." What that thing turned into with the mudslinging and just the reputation damage that was done to three attorneys that went about their business under the closest
Well,
I've seen is my wife going through
right.
the
Allie's
kind of-
been through it.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any reputation damage.
I hope not.
not
it's
in the legal
really-
profession, everyone saw right through that.
Yeah, it's super frustrating because when you say that Brad and Andy were responsible for someone's death, which is absurd and hurtful to Andy for a lot of reasons, and absurd. And you talk about the defense being unethical. What you're doing is you're putting targets on our back, because there are those people who will believe you, who think that we've done something wrong. Right after the sentencing, a man came up to us and said he hopes we all burn in hell. Okay, I respect your opinion. That's fine. But if something were to happen to us, Brad and Andy have had death threats. You've now put a target on our backs, and who's going to investigate?
Right.
The very people who put the target on the back. And I want to address this too, because I was really disappointed in a lot of the things that were said, and I really want to touch about this. And I pulled it off specifically when Doug Carter said, "How about we hit that reset button and understand that justice in this country was served? And if you don't like justice in this country, go to another one." Let's tone down the rhetoric. Stop all the politics and the nonsense and the conspiracy theories. Let's talk about that, please, for a minute, because that is so unbelievably infuriating. We have a system that includes a system for appeals, because the fact of the matter is sometimes juries get it wrong. And what you're trying to do is say, if you don't believe in this jury's verdict, you should leave and go to another country. Well, what if all the people who came out for the Memphis 3 did that? Because, there were 3 kids who were convicted in Memphis of murder. And it was because of people speaking out for them and movie stars and
Eddie Vedder.
Yeah, exactly. That it's because of that, because those people didn't go to another country, because they spoke out and did the right thing, that those 3 were released. One of them had to learn how to walk again because he'd been in solitary confinement. One of them had to have eye surgery because he hadn't seen sunlight, and they were not guilty. And what about the Central Park 5? What if no one stood up for them? What if all those people moved to another country? What happens there? My son just made me watch the movie The Hurricane. He doesn't it hit a little close to home. I love him. But Reuben Carter, who was convicted, you know, 3 people moved from Canada here. They came to our country to speak out, to procure his release from jail. This isn't how we operate in this country. When have we lost the ability to listen to other people's opinions and say, that's okay? That man who wants me to burn in hell, that's fine. I'm a big girl. I knew what I was signing up for. You can say that. I don't care. And I'm not going to get into a fight with you over it. And I'm not going to tell you should move to another country.
Right. But for the government to get on television and suggest to everybody that this is the end, it's over, and no one should ever talk about it again, like you're saying, when there's an entire appellate system set up for this very reason, and there are wrongfully convicted, exonerated all over the country every day of the week, it's to and such an exorbitant number that so many states have done away with the death penalty because
Illinois.
Exactly.
Governor Ryan.
Because a lot of times they get it wrong, and you don't want to put someone to death. So I found it appalling as well. And you know, you were speaking about the Norse paganism and this whole, just going back to the whole, this wasn't something that came from the defense. There was an FBI witness that you attempted to present that you weren't able to. Can you remind the people about that?
I believe you're speaking about Agent Pohl.
Yes.
In Agent Pohl was not going to testify about Nordic paganism. Agent Pohl was going to presumably talk about a discussion he'd had with Brad Weber. And so we tried, I felt I tried very diligently to work with the FBI and to get his testimony. And he, during the trial, so, you know, the election happened during the trial. Right. And Agent Pohl was in charge of election security in Texas. So that seemed kind of like a big deal, you know, not only to me, but to the FBI. And then we found out he had a medical condition that kept him from flying up here. So we asked, you know, the court has the ability for good cause shown to allow someone to testify remotely. His testimony was going to be short. And we thought, you know, if the fact that he gets on a plane and could die, that seemed like good cause.
And this would have been to combat, I'm assuming Weber's testimony, or was Weber's testimony about driving a van, or was that what it was? Yeah. Was that a surprise that Weber was switching the automobile that he had been driving that day? If you
there were a few surprises from Brad Weber.
So, and this,
well, no, let me jump in. The primary surprise was that he changed his story entirely, which was originally to Pohl and the Hammond cop. He had told them that he didn't go straight home, that he went out to service his ATM machines when he left work. So he changed the story completely. Like when he came in and testified, and he was their last witness in their case in chief. And like the whole courtroom, and Judge Gull did a pretty good job about keeping us really, really quiet in the gallery. She ruled with an iron fist with respect to that. But like the buzz in the courtroom when he came in and took the stand and, you know, said what he said on direct, and then was so combative with Andy on cross, and just locked into this whole statement. And Andy had a brilliant moment of cross-examination wherein, you know, and it wasn't even with Brad Weber. It was when he had Mullen on the stand, when he had asked Mullen if he had communicated with Brad Weber about what the topic of discussion was going to be when they called Brad Weber back so many years later to discuss something. And Mullen says, I didn't say a word to him. I just said, hey man, you know, we just need to talk to you. Come on in. And then
he came Weber ready, armed and ready.
Yeah,
no, Weber had said that he came in armed and ready, meaning he had gone through all his text messages in order to see what vehicle he was driving that day. However, he allegedly had gone in not knowing anything about what the topic of discussion was going to be. So, like,
And
to
I
me,
forgot they changed the time. He changed the timeline. He got home at
oh yeah,
2:30
he
versus
changed it
3:30.
completely.
That was
I mean, he completely reverted. That's why getting Pohl in was critical. I mean, we're talking about the credence of an FBI agent in a real brief direct examination testifying that, yeah, this guy told us a completely different story back when it mattered most, back closest at the time to when the crimes were committed, that's what he told us. Now, could the state have worked around it and said, all right, well, the things happened right around his property. Maybe he wanted to distance himself, maybe, but like the jury never got to hear that, so that's just another thing that they're going to bring up on appeal, which.
But in Indiana, did they change the rules for laying foundation? Because I thought foundation was very clearly laid.
Yeah, I mean,
for the report.
To counter to bring in Pohl and to counter to impeach him on the time. So she can't speak.
That'll come up. All right. So here we've kept you so long. I want to wrap it back around real quickly to that press conference and kind of like this narrative, and it goes hand in hand to what Doug Carter was saying at the end, about this concept that, it's like this narrative that's out there, for the Rick Allen is the guy, he should burn in hell, that kind of that crowd that is just adamant that he's guilty, which is fine. That's their opinion. But where I take exception to the fact, and it leads into what Carter said about, this is the verdict. Let's quit all the rhetoric. Let's quit talking about the conspiracy theories, where you've got attorneys out there that are saying things like, well, if these defense attorneys were good people, that they wouldn't even appeal it because Rick Allen had wanted to confess, and his defense attorneys are the ones that is stopping him from confessing. It's all the defense attorneys that wouldn't let Rick Allen confess because he desperately wanted to confess. I don't know if you can speak on it.
Please ask Brad and Andy about that.
I will.
I will. Look, again, our Constitution allows him to appeal. And if we have to follow the rule of law. If there is no security in Rick Allen's conviction, right? If we're not getting the right person, and I'm saying this generally, not even about Rick Allen, but if there's no justice to convict the wrong person, that just compounds the injustice, and it compounds the trauma for many more people. Yeah. We have a system, and that kind of was a theme throughout the sentencing. Don't appeal, don't appeal, don't appeal. Well, if you're secure in the trial, if you're secure in the process, if you're secure in your conviction, in your verdict, you shouldn't be afraid of that.
Nope. Right. Especially because they're so hard to win. But speaking of sentencing.
But the insinuation is that it's the defense attorneys that are convincing Rick not to appeal, or that are convincing him not to refuse to appeal it, to just because he wants to accept responsibility. Like, that's the narrative that they're spinning. Like, that is the narrative that they're spinning out there, that Rick desperately wants to admit to these crimes and apologize to the families.
Well, the good news is then we have 2 new appellate counsel.
Right.
So they can take it from there.
Right.
But that would be highly unethical to not allow it. Whether someone accepts a plea is purely their decision. And it would be highly unethical to not allow someone in their right mind to take a plea if that's what they want to do.
Exactly. Now, again, turning to sentencing, everyone has been dying to know what happened with you and Nick at the end of sentencing.
Nick and I had a small discussion. That's all I'm going to say.
That's all she's gonna say.
Damn it. Well,
I'll tell you that, my last question to Chris Cecil, after that, I sat down and Andy, whom I've known forever, said to me, "You kind of came uncharacteristically unglued there." And as I said, I don't know that the word uncharacteristic is maybe very appropriate. So I'll just leave it at that.
So that she got characteristically, her character came out with Nick at the end of sentencing.
Well, Jennifer, you've been amazing. We're so thankful that you came on with us, and we're willing to talk about it because we know it's still very much an open wound. As fellow trial attorneys and defense lawyers, we know just how deep these things cut. So we really appreciate you taking the time and talking to us about it, because we know it's tough. And personally, I want you to take care of yourself. I want you to know that from an outsider's perspective, I thought you guys did just a great job with the hand you were dealt. You should be proud of it in terms of trying the case that you had to try. I mean, you had no option. Like what you were handed, you did what you could do. And as an attorney, you did your jobs. And like you said, like the reality is the trial is really, and the conviction is just the beginning of the rest of the process, which is something I've tried to enlighten people. It's like, this is just the beginning. And for all of us that really do want justice for the families, and, the thought of them having to go through a second trial because of the way things may have came down during this first go around, is tragic to me, and I mean that genuinely. I think that, families in these types of situations are not necessarily kept apprised of what's going on with the appellate process. They're not necessarily kept apprised of how the process works. And, it's kind of like you're in this constant state of not knowing what's going on, which is always the most unsettling. I mean, the fear of the unknown is always the worst. So,
Right.
we'll see how it shakes out, but I applaud you for your efforts in that case. And you should be proud of what you did. You stood up, and you did yourself proud. And I'm sure that everybody that is around you and is close to you feels the exact same way. So take a little bit of solace in that.
Right. And I know there were a lot of due process issues that came up. There were a lot of other, evidentiary issues, things like that. Is there anything else that you want to speak to that we haven't touched on, that you want to say about any of that?
I think we've covered everything. I had made some notes earlier. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything. I thank you guys very much. And I've been watching some things that popped up. Appreciate very much everyone's kind words. It means a lot. Bob, you were had some kind words during the trial, and that really meant a lot. And we all appreciated that very much. So thank you. Thank you for keeping the story going, the dialogue.
And thanks for all your hard work. I mean, we know that it's not easy, and we will let Jennifer go and then get to some of your questions. And thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thanks, Allie.
All right.
Thanks, Bob. Absolutely.
All right.
Bye. All right. So we are going to move to questions and thank yous for everybody. We've got a lot of new members, which we love. We thank all of you, Karen and Allie and Jessica and JJ. Amanda got things started. Thank you for your generosity. And now I was going to print Sinead. She really got it started. I'll start. Let's go. Thank you for your generosity. Of course, Who's Your Girl? Coming in hot twice. Thank you for your generosity. Meg, thank you for your generosity. More new members. We've got Dark Arts by Adrian. Yep. And Paraphone Applewood. I mean, wait, I'm saying that wrong. Speak for me, babe. Persephone.
Persephone Applewood.
Persephone. Gifted 5 Defense Diaries. That's a name that I recognize. I should have been able to pronounce it. Who's Your Girl? Again, member for 5 months. Yes. Dr. Vonda. Ooh, always giver, as you like to call them, Bob. Gifting her 10 memberships. Thank you, Mar. Thank you for your generosity, Karen. Justice Seeker Super Sticker. Thank you for your generosity. And Melanie Parker, very generous. Oh, right. Free Rick Allen. Pammy, thank you. We appreciate you as well. Dr. Vonda. Persephone. Thanks again for your generosity. Damn it. This was in my list of questions that I did not get to, but we will have, it will definitely be asked of the, on one or both of the next 2 interviews with the lawyers. And this will also have to get asked, can anything be done to prevent Gull from not preserving the evidence after today's ruling? Was there a new ruling today, babe?
On what?
About the preservation of evidence. I know there was one last week, but Rochelle says there was one today. I might have missed an email.
I didn't see it. We were doing the Karen Reed thing, so I haven't seen an email come in from the clerk, so I'm not aware.
Who am I looking for? Oh. Now, the last thing I saw is from yesterday, but she might be in another country where yesterday is today. No, that was the proposed order to appoint 2 public defenders. But there are rules about evidence that has to be preserved. I'm sure the defense is going to follow up to make more clear whatever it is that they want preserved. Hopefully I'm not being overly optimistic in saying that I think that that's going to be taken care of. What's that blue sky? And thanks again, Persephone. Babe, do you know?
It's like the Twitter alternative, I think. There's like Threads and Blue Sky. Same.
Thank you for your generosity. Low light recovery. How are social media users able to impact Richard Allen's appeal process in a positive way? And I can tell you that she basically gave that answer at the end by just staying active, staying involved, keeping the fight going, just like they did for, people did for all the cases that Jennifer mentioned. And thanks us for streaming this to everybody. Rick Allen is innocent. Post-punk mama, thank you for your generosities. And I know I did put that up. I think I forgot to put it up the second time, but it was one that I put up while Jennifer was on. And thanks again, Pammy, for your generosity. Thanks, Miss Always Right, for your generosity. And you're welcome. And thank you. Mags gifted a membership. Lisa coming in hot. And I know I put that up right when Jennifer was talking about using the state evidence to show the headphones were plugged in. And she said she answered it. She was shaking. Her legs were shaking. She was so excited, like thought that was it. That was all the reasonable doubt right there. All right. Chris, new member. Thank you.
Welcome.
And this is Lindsay, I meant to post your question when I was asking basically that question when Bob was bringing up about the video. and I had put it up at some point, but then I accidentally put up a different comment that was also about the video. But thanks for your generosity. Majesta Alexander, thank you for your generosity. And we did get to your question. Lisa, thanks again for your generosity. And I guess all we know about that is she came unhinged. Is that what she said? She didn't say unhinged.
No.
I'm thinking about us unhinged. What did she say? She became uncharacteristically.
Yeah.
I forget the word now. Rochelle, thank you for your generosity. And that was the other question I posted while we were answering that. And thank you for your generosity, Lisa. We did get to that question about why didn't anybody ask? It was on my list as well. Kay, thank you for your generosity. She feels the water and the air temperature would have caused hypothermia if the bodies were out there all that time. Thank you, Rochelle, again for your generosity. We did get to that question about the headphones being removed. M's in Krebin World, thank you for your generosity. And we did post your comment. Jennifer got to know how appreciative you are. Thank you, Yellow Jacket. Interpolation, the insertion of something of a different nature into something else. Yeah, that's something, all right. The judge was the whole problem. Thanks for your generosity, Rochelle. To the innocents everywhere, please don't give in to them. I Spy CR33, thank you for your generosity. Jamie Dawn, 82, thank you for your generosity. And I know Jennifer saw yours amongst the comments, thanking her. Curious Contrarian, she thinks Rick Allen is a convicted murderer. He murdered 2 young girls. The hero worship is weird and sus. I don't see the hero worship, but your opinion is appreciated. Amanda, thank you for your generosity. And I know Jennifer saw your comment as well. And Curious Contrarian, which I did put up when she posted it. Gull is a saint. Just saying.
That's a guy.
Oh, see, Bob knows who all of you are. I can't keep track of everybody. But we appreciate your opinion that Gull's a saint. Low Light Recovery, thank you for your generosity. And if you go to all the trouble framing Rick, it becomes a career deletion, not accounting for the jury. So many powerful self-interests aligned to maintain Rick's conviction. Can he even get a fair appeal in Indiana? We shall see. Low Light Recovery. Bearjaw, thank you for your generosity and for your comments. We love you as well. Where am I?
Precocent.
Yep. Oh, Precocent. We were on our way to the bridge listening to Abby's favorite music really loud. We listened to Heathens by 21 Pilots, Duper's Delight, FBI Message, Ives Statement, Burstein's Interview. They knew. Well, she's coming in hot. All right. Thanks again, Curious Contrarian. Precocent, thanks again.
O'Shea's got them tuies. They'll come in handy.
Yep.
Curious box wine for everyone when the appeals are denied. KO block curiously Dan.
Appreciate. Thank you for your
thank you, guys.
generosity.
Thank you guys. Dr. Vonda, we were better than the monsters. Dr. Vonda, thank you for asking, Allie. I love you for it. Thank you, Dr. Vonda. We appreciate you always. Lisa Shelton, you were incredibly generous tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Dee Dee. Amazing job. Rochelle, thank you, Bob, Allie, Jennifer, and wonderful mods. You are all outstanding. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Michelle, thank you for your generosity. Eartha Kitty, love that screen name. It's great.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can't wait till episodes 2 and 3. Please ask them if they think Rick is factually innocent. I asked Jennifer, and I mean, they're limited in what they can say. I mean, technically, they were just removed today from the they are no longer attorneys of record, as they were taken off of the docket, which is a little strange. But I'll ask them. I'll always ask them. And then, but thank you for that, Eartha. And then Alicia, new member. Oh, family hug. We appreciate you. You guys
Family
have been
hugs
amazing.
for all of you who I didn't give family hugs to, all your new members.
We got some late ones. Curious Contrarian. Love you, Bob. Thanks, Dan, man. Appreciate you, brother. Christina, much love and admiration to the entire defense team. The world is watching. Canada, free for Rick Allen. And then finally, Colonel Network. Loved it. Thanks, Bob and Allie. Keep an eye out for the Tales of Bridgefoot, Delphi. I love the entire People's Army. All right. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for hanging. We hope it didn't disappoint. It's the first. We've got 2 more. We've got Brad and Andy. Andy is tomorrow night. Again, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 7 Eastern. And that will be obviously 4 p.m. if you're over on the West Coast. So hopefully you'll be here.
And Bob, is there a way to post a members only post, like in the community page or something where only members see it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to be doing that to get some questions for the next 2 as well, just in a separate place. We're not going to prevent anyone else from, throwing stuff out there, but you'll put one up tonight for tomorrow.
Yep. So, all right, you guys are amazing. Thank you for hanging with us for so long. Again, thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. I really appreciate it. I thought it was a great interview. So,
and I'm going to read, this one's gone on too long, but in the beginning of the next one, I'm going to start with Abby and Libby's letter. And when we record this for the podcast, do a more formal beginning. I'm going to read the letter in before we start as well.
Okay. All right, y'all. You guys are the best. Just remember this. Without y'all, I'm just an old man.
Talking about a lot of cases.